Hey, everybody, welcome back to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs this Tuesday afternoon. We are going to switch gears to looking at the State Ethics Commission and State Code of Ethics Miscellaneous Bill. So that's draft request 240229, draft 1.4. And Mr. Devlin has given us a lovely bill summary to help introduce us to the bill. So Tim, take it away, please.
Thank you very much for having me again, Chair McCarthy. Again, for the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. For you, you have both the bill in its entirety, and it's been, identified by its drafting request number 24-0229, draft 1.4. And then you also have a summary of that draft 1.4 as well. This bill is, the shorthand as right now, it's either the miscellaneous ethics bill or the State Ethics Commission State Code of Ethics bill. Essentially, in brief, it expands the powers of the State Ethics Commission and also disclosure requirements for candidates and office holders. Also cleans up some of the statutory language in Title III and the State Ethics Code statutes in particular. This bill, starting off the purpose in a little bit more detail before kind of really walking through it. This will require that certain county officers, both running for and holding office, file financial disclosures. It will create penalties for delinquent disclosures for candidates for state office, county office, as well as state senators and representatives. And it will grant the State Ethics Commission powers to perform supplemental investigations and hearings and to issue warnings, reprimands, and recommend actions. This bill will create a full-time exempt legal counsel position in the State Ethics Commission and reclassify the executive director of the State Ethics Commission from a part-time to a full-time exempt state employee. Also, there's reclassification of an administrative position in this bill as well, from part-time to full-time, I believe. Also, this bill will add a member of to the State Ethics Commission to be appointed by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Also, just had some upfront notes on the background, both the current disclosure requirements under statute, as well as the current duties of the State Ethics Commission. And you'll find hyperlinks to the various statutes throughout this if you'd like to either have me pull something open for specific language as to what's being amended in particular, or you're also, they're there if you'd like to do so. On your own time or wherever that may be. Always happy to answer any questions you may have that come up about those. So part one of this bill has to do with candidate financial disclosure requirements. It's only section 1. Section 1 amends Title 17, section 2414, and requires candidates for county offices to submit financial disclosure forms in addition to candidates in state offices and the General Assembly. Importantly, here, county officer, the term isn't all county officers. It's really the county treasurer, the sheriff, and the state's attorney. I just made a brief note in here that assistant probate judges do have a form of disclosure under the Vermont Code of Judicial, but there's a lot of nuance to that issue. I'm happy to go into that at a later point if you'd like me to. Subsection A further requires those disclosure forms to now include additional information regarding the source of personal income, membership on boards, commissions, of entities, loans made to a company if the candidate certain threshold circumstances, companies in which the candidate has an ownership or controlling interest over a certain time period, and the full name of the candidate's spouse or domestic partners. Chair McCarthy, would you like me to pause there and go into further detail on the sources of personal income? That's where the most ink has been spilled here, or I can just kind of keep going for now.
Yeah, so I just wanted to pause and give the committee a second before we dive into that to consider a couple of things here. So right now, we, as candidates and then as elected officials, have financial disclosure requirements. This is expanding who and also what gets reported.
Yes.
Anybody have any questions about that before Tim goes forward. Representative Pango.
Just a quick question. Does this mirror what the Senate has just done? I tried to find their bill and I can't.
So in the Senate version of our H429, is that what you're referring to? The elections bill that we worked on last year, they had added some language about financial disclosures.
Possibly. I didn't know which bill they tacked it on to.
Yeah, I think,
But it was something that's a binding action for the Senate. They will have to do X, Y, and Z.
well, maybe we are not talking about the same thing because
Yeah.
That's the record reporting thing, like what they had, just like paper copies.
No, it had to do with disclosures of like financial
Yeah, no,
information.
that's,
Yeah.
yeah, they were.
Was it on H429?
I think that's something they made.
So-
Okay, I didn't think.
yeah, so they, I think themselves have had a conversation. I don't know where they ended up about the way that their current financial disclosures are reported and how you might get access to that. That's been a topic of conversation. I don't know if their rules committee did anything about that, so I
I
don't.
think it must have been the Rules Committee. I think they did. That's what I heard. And
Oh, okay. So that's something maybe we can take a look at here. This language, I think, does mirror largely and build upon some language that Senate GovOps did look at for inclusions in that potential miscellaneous elections bill, which, you know,
So it wasn't a bill that was passed. It was something their Rules Committee took up.
yeah.
Okay, that makes.
So there is a confusion because this is going to apply broadly to
To
all
state.
legislative and executive branch and county officials if we adopt this language.
Quickie, county offices, if I missed, I apologize. That would entail, I mean, like, for instance, like, don't state's attorneys already have to, I would assume sheriffs already have to. What? Did I miss?
Yeah, I don't think right now there's not the requirement that they.
Oh, there is not a requirement for those two
Right
offices?
now.
Oh, really? Huh, that's interesting.
Executive director, so do you wanna?
Just sheriffs.
Sheriffs, yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
not
it's
state
just really
attorneys.
this year. not
Really?
state.
Interesting.
This is one of the things is that I think a lot of us we assume that like everybody's in the same
Yeah.
and we don't
Bucket.
have universal requirements because it's really only since 2018 that we've even had the ethics commission. So we're behind a lot of other states in terms of having.
I could have sworn I saw on bottom of signs for that office, the disclosure thing, which would say they would be, right? But maybe I'm.
I mean, they could put them on there.
Anyway, true, I mean, yes.
So one thing I would say is we're talking here about the personal financial disclosure, which gets at transparency of conflict of interest, which is separate and apart from campaign finance disclosures, which is, where did the money come from to fund my campaign?
Got it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
are both important, but.
Yeah.
We'll get to
Sorry,
that.
we'll get to that.
On its way.
I'm just being forward thinking. That was it.
No.
All right, I think we're all on the same page now.
And just to try to produce a little bit more context about existing law, currently for candidates, let's see, if we need to file financial disclosures, that's under 17, the elections code, Title 17, Section 2414. That's for candidates for state office, state senator, and state representative. And then while in office, certain executive officers, governor, lieutenant governor, treasurer, secretary of state, auditor, attorney general, and agency secretaries, commissioners, and the deputies, the governor, they have to file similar financial disclosures pursuant to Title III VSA Section 1211 while in office. That's what the current landscape looks like right now. And then those county officers that be added by this bill for candidate financial disclosure requirements are county treasurer, sheriff, and state's attorney.
Okay.
Can I ask a question on that big A? It's the employment piece or business names were initially said without needing to disclose any individual clients, and now it says including the names of any clients. I guess, and then the other question I've got is, regarding, the clients who had business before at a municipal or state office. What could that entail? Could that entail getting a building permit? Could it entail being a vendor for the school? I mean, all the above?
Sure. Good question, business before. We don't define business in here, I believe. I can double check that. And I think it is maybe open question as to whether it's business, does that require a dollar sign, some sort of financial aspect to it, like based on a contract or a bid, or is it more abstract, like permitting, some the business of governance, more term of art. That is not specified in here.
I'm a little concerned with the wording on the page in that one.
I'm flagging that for future discussion.
No, my brain was doing a similar exercise when I read that.
And so the change here, that Representative Higley was asking about. So under current law, the disclosure, if there's self-employment, the names of any, so it's that there are no, under current law, without needing to disclose any individual clients. And this would say if that client has business before municipal or state government during the previous 12 months, and the names for whom the candidate or candidate spouse or domestic partner has received $10,000 or more in the previous 12 months. So if you're an attorney and you're self-employed, you have your own practice and you're serving in one of these offices, like state representative, you would have to disclose any of your clients that paid you $10,000 or more, for example.
For another example, and if I'm a general contractor, self-employed, and I was building a house for a client that, like I said, was a vendor for the town in whatever regard. Say they supplied their communications and technical support for the town. And I was building a house for them and it was over $10,000, then I'd have to disclose their name.
It would seem like that'd be the case. And then there's also a additional qualifier that it's within the previous 12 months. So that, yes, I think.
This is the initial proposal on the table. All right, Sam, let's keep going.
Let's see, would you like me to just kind of list off the sources of personal income or just skip down to the next part? That's where I paused before.
You should probably list.
Yeah, I think we should go ahead and go through it. We've got the time. That's what we're here for.
So this is in subsection A, which further requires those disclosure forms for candidates again to now include the additional information regarding 1, sources of personal income. This would include the names of any clients who had business before any municipal or state office, department, or agency during the previous 12 months. Names of clients from whom the candidate has received $10,000 or more in the previous 12 months. Investment income, including individual stock holdings or investments valued at $10,000 or more at any point in the previous 12 months, which shall be listed individually, as shall municipal bonds issued in the state of Vermont, regardless of total value.
Representative Hank.
So that's holdings. That's not like making a profit on something. Like there are two different things. You hold stocks that might be valued at $20,000 or you sold stock in which you made $20,000, two different things. You're saying just holdings.
No, it'd be, I believe it's the opposite. It'd be the investment income. So let's see, individual stock holdings or investments valued at $10,000. So you'd have to receive income from it. So what you say,
Okay.
dividends, selling of stock.
Investments are different from investment income, so that's why I'm asking that this be clarified. Because you can hold investments, but you're not making any income on it. It might be just on paper.
Yeah, it's like a whole unrealized gains.
So the idea here though, so is actually, I think the recommendation, and I want to ask Executive Director Siebert this, is that any holdings over $10,000 or more are reported. The idea being that you would want to know if somebody was making a policy decision based on their desire to make the value of their holdings go up, right? It's a conflict of interest transparency measure.
The idea is that you're understanding what people's financial interests are, so like you could be holding something, but you're making a decision that affects that company, that's gonna affect your stock value. And so the number we put out was $16,000. So we kind of did a survey of other states to come up with that number because it's high enough that people are gonna have a interest in half the outcome. Versus, picking a number that's too low. Like, for example, you're not gonna say $1,000 because the assumption is that you're not making major decisions based on, whether you're gonna make $1,500 versus, $1,100, but $10,000 is a significant amount. You can adjust the amount if you think that, that's too low. But I would recommend that you keep that provision in place because that really is getting at the heart of the matter, really understanding what people's financial interests are.
Representative Hago, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if this is the time to debate this or not, or we're just looking at the words on the page and what they mean.
What I would say is, I think this is the time to ask questions about what this means, and then we'll come back when we go through this again and have more of a committee discussion about where to draw the lines and what makes sense. But I do want to illuminate what are we talking about here and make sure we really understand what this means.
Okay, so my question here, just to be perfectly clear, is I or my domestic partner may have a holding of $10,001 in an oil stock, for instance, Exxon Mobil. And that has to be reported just because I'm a candidate for state office. According to this, correct? Okay. All right, and that is not just joint accounts. That is whomever I'm living with in my household, who's my domestic partner, might have that holding in his or her portfolio. And that will have to be declared on my candidate consent form.
I'll have to look it up to see exactly how it's it's slipping from my mind which section applies to domestic partners, spouses, members of household.
So that's right here, candidate spouse or domestic partner.
Yeah, that's the way I read it too. Yeah.
And same thing if my domestic partner were to take a job that involved a state or any government entity, I guess. That would have to be declared on my form.
I believe that was indeed the drive of the recommendations.
So this is very similar to what the Senate just passed.
So I wanted to give Executive Director Siebert a chance to.
I was gonna say that's already the case. So any source of employment income for your spouse or domestic partner, that already has to be reported for an executive officer or a candidate. So that wouldn't be new.
And so it wouldn't be what?
That wouldn't be a new requirement because that already has to be reported, at these sources of income for your spouse or domestic partner. So that wouldn't be a new addition. That's already existing.
Isn't that over a particular threshold? Is it that $10,000 threshold? But that's income from employment. That is not stockholding.
No, right now we're stockholding, so I don't want to go too details, but Vermont has very limited disclosure compared to other states. So this is something that is common in other states. And so right now you have to disclose the fact that you have investments of $5,000 or over, but you don't have to disclose what they are specifically. And so that's where we see like the big gap between what is the best practice and what other states do and what Vermont is doing now.
Representative Chase.
Some of these I've seen have also included close family members, like if your parents or if your kids have $100,000 in Exxon stock, you'd report that also, but this doesn't appear to include that. It's just candidate and partner, right?
That's what's on
Yeah,
there.
that's correct. In other states, you do have to expand the definition of family member for reporting purposes. So yeah, like children, parents, things like that. So Vermont is still limited in the sense of only asking for yourself and spouse or domestic partner.
Do you have info on how many states include the broader family and how many don't?
We could look into it if it's something that you're interested in expanding the definition. I think we look into it. I don't have the numbers off the top.
Thank you. I know there's going to be interest in exactly how this works, so we'll also put a little star by this for future discussion. Thanks, Tim. Oh, Representative Bridge, Jim.
We're not advancing this towards the people down the hill here who actually have the ability to make decisions that would impact some of the things that we probably never would broach.
So I think what Tim's going to get into is the applicability of expanded disclosure for not only candidates for these offices that are listed here, but as we move through the bill, there are going to be increased disclosure requirements for the executive branch.
Executive, you went too far. Talking judicial.
So judicial has a whole different set of requirements. Executive Director Sivert would probably be able to illuminate how this bill would or would not affect them.
Well, our recommendation would be to include judges, and I think we made that recommendation last year. So I think that the question is, how far do you expand this? So I think we do have a chart that we came up last year that we're happy to resend, just to give what the different options are. I think right now we've just been mostly dealing with, expanding the forms, the existing forms and who they apply to currently, plus looking at, candidates for county office. That would be the expansion of the category of people it applies to, but there are, of course, options to expand it further.
My knee-jerk reaction to this is that it's encompassing and invasive. To have Higley have to go to his customer and say, I need you to disclose to me so that I can disclose to somebody else, and then it's public record.
Big brother.
That's pretty deep into the weeds. And I don't see, you got domestic partner covered, you got marital partner covered, you don't have.
So what I'd like to do is take the recommendations from the Ethics Commission as a starting point for a discussion about how thorough we believe these should be. And I want to at least get these on the table today. And we will have a lot of time to go through and mull this and think about it. And so I don't want to have the whole debate now before we've gotten 3 pages into their recommendations. So why don't we go ahead now? I hear the concern and I don't want this to be tedious, or I also know that part of the challenge that we have in Vermont, and I wanted to have this conversation really thoroughly this year, is that the public's trust in the institutions that we have is being eroded. And there are many good government groups that have ranked Vermont as having low marks for transparency on these ethics issues. And so how far we want to go, I totally know that that's going to be a point of a lot of conversation. So we'll hear these recommendations and then we'll work from them as a starting point.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure, of course.
I would love to see comparing our low bar in terms of disclosure with our low bar in terms of conviction of actually,
People do it
yeah,
very slow.
that's just a pass by it, but it's on the table.
Yep. I don't want to get into the whole conversation now, but we'll get there. All right. So Tim, let's keep going through the bill.
Sure.
Come on back.
Would you like me to go through the additional information being required?
Yes.
Yes. Number 2, membership on board commissions or other entities that make decisions about the allocation or disbursement of state funds over the previous 12 months. 3, loans made to a company if the candidate owned more than 10% of that company, and if the loan was not commercially reasonable and made in the ordinary course of business. That should be not commercially reasonable, really not made in the ordinary course of business. Or companies in which the candidate had an ownership or controlling interest in the previous 12 months at business with the state or municipality. 5, full name of the candidate's spouse or domestic partner.
Those are a little more self-explanatory, I think. Don't see any hands, so let's keep going.
Okay. Part 2, in-office financial disclosure requirements. This entails sections 2 through 5. Section 2 amends Title 3 VSA, Section 1201 definitions, by migrating the definition of conflict of interest and servants from other sections to this chapter, which contains the rest of the definitions. A new definition for county officer has been added, meaning an individual holding office in a county of county treasurer and state's attorney. So 2 things that I'd just like to emphasize here is that the migrating of the definitions does not have any substantive impact on these definitions, that is conflict of interest and what is a public servant. And also the county officer in this in-office financial disclosure requirement statutory section, body of statutory sections, is a limited definition and includes county treasurer and state's attorney versus other county officers. This section also adds to the definition of government conduct regulated by law. The creating, that is adding, creating or permitting to persist any unlawful employment practice pursuant to 21 VSA, section 495, which includes discrimination and sexual harassment. This will enable the State Ethics Commission to refer and track complaints regarding this type of conduct. Section 3 is amended only by migrating those two migrating the definition of public servant from the applicability section into the definition section, again having no substantive effect on the law. And section 4 does the same by migrating the definition of conflict of interest in the definition section. Section 5 amends 3 VSA, section 1211, to require the same additional information to be disclosed for in-office executive officers and county officers as candidates for those officers in section 1 above.
So this has the same disclosure requirements that we've talked about in a little detail before for executive officers and county officers. And could you just remind the committee what the definition of an executive officer is?
Sure. Executive officer here, we have to find it. Let's see. Let's pull it up. Executive officer is the existing definition in section 3 VSA 1201, the State Ethics Code. It means a state officer or under the office of the governor, an agency secretary or deputy, or deputy commissioner or deputy. State officer is defined further on to mean governor, lieutenant governor, treasurer, secretary of state, auditor of accounts, or attorney general.
So executive officers are all the constitutionally elected statewide officers.
Mhm.
The county officers that we talked about, excluding the sheriff, who have their own requirements that we've worked on in this committee. And then under the governor, secretaries, deputy secretaries, and commissioners and their deputies.
Yes.
So similar requirements for both executive branch electeds and appointees and all of us in the General Assembly.
Part 3, which is only one section, section 6, has to do with delinquent disclosures for candidates for office, for state office, county office, and also for state senators and state representatives. This will add a new section to be Title 17 VSA, section 2415, to be titled Failure to File penalties. And this will install penalties for candidates for state, county, and legislative offices who do not properly file their financial disclosures. Subsections A through C create the penalty structure. Secretary of State will notify the State Ethics Commission, which will issue a notice of delinquency to the candidate. The candidate shall have 5 working days from the date of the issuance of the notice to cure the delinquency, after which, if not cured, the candidate will pay $10 a day up to a maximum penalty of $1,000 in total.
Representative Waters.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you where it says, penalties, for candidates who do not properly file their financial disclosures. Trying to remember when we were looking at it, that doesn't pertain to making an error, correct? It just means not filing on time.
And yes, in subsection E below it, it's also kind of dovetails with this.
Okay.
That makes any intentionally fraudulent statements on disclosure forms a false claim under the False Claims Act, which should then be referred to Attorney General and State's Attorney for enforcement. So I think the line is intentionally fraudulent versus incomplete or honest mistake.
Yeah, or just not filed at all, like missing the deadline.
The idea here isn't that, if Representative Higley had 7 clients and he reported 6 of them, but forgot the 7th one that had a $10,001 invoice. That kind of omission isn't what this is getting at.
Right.
Oh, I think Mr. Jones, do you have I think you're muted. I can't, okay. DJ, yeah. 14.
Thank you. I apologize for interrupting. That provision, like in many states, attempts to also sweep in those people who file the form, file it on time, but for example, have on the form none of your business. And that would be filing the form in contravention of the statute, even though it's on time and it's not fraudulent.
Fun.
So we may have a discussion about getting a little bit specific about what properly means. I can see that conversation happening as this.
And not that this may be too helpful, but properly, the bill language, the equivalent language we have in the bill here is filed in the time and manner in which it's set forth under statutory deadlines. So time and manner. Part 3, I just did that. Part 4 pertains to the State Ethics Commission handling of complaints. This is section 7 through 10 of the.
Back up for just a second. So I wanted to get a little bit more specific about what those penalties are in here while we're on the sections, before we go on to section 7.
Sure.
As envisioned here.
So here you can find the penalty under failure to file penalties at the top of page 15. And this is A3. And we have beginning 6 work days from the date of notice, the delinquent candidate for state office, county office, state senator, or state representative shall pay a $10 penalty for each day thereafter that the disclosure remains delinquent. Provided, however, in no event shall the amount of any penalty imposed under the subdivision exceed $1,000.
And that's notice from the State Ethics Commission. So there's a complaint from a member of the public or some other candidate, or somebody that says, hey, the deputy commissioner of X, there's no disclosure here. They get a notice from the State Ethics Commission, and then the clock starts ticking on the sixth day after the notice.
Right, the chain of events would be the Secretary of State's office would start things off, and then they notify the State Ethics Commission, which would file the notice, et cetera, et cetera. Yes.
Talk about those timelines and trying to get some real world thinking in there, but I know this is something that people have complained to the Secretary of State about significantly, and probably also to the Ethics Commission, is that there's no penalty for not filing other than shame right now.
Part 4, having to do with State Ethics Commission handling of complaints, is section 7 through 10. Section 7 amends Title 3 VSA, section 1221, State Ethics Commission, to empower the State Ethics Commission to independently investigate and hold hearings regarding ethics complaints. Just a quick note here that this section, 1221, is also amended by section 11 later on to add another member to the commission. And also by section 12 to remove the requirement that the executive director be part-time. We'll get to that later. Section 8 and 9 really just have to do with renaming the sections to be more accurately descriptive. And section 10 adds a new section to be 3 VSA 1223A, titled Investigations, Hearings, and Recommendations. And this section would enable the commission to investigate complaints, hold hearings, and issue warnings, reprimands, and recommended actions. And this summary breaks over the next page, but just so everybody's following along. This section details the expansion of the commission's proposed powers to investigate and hold hearings, and this is a lot of the meat of the bill right here. The commission would, briefly, be able to investigate complaints regardless of receiving a complaint, hold hearings to gather evidence and testimony, issue subpoenas and administer oaths, issue warnings or reprimands and recommend actions to be taken, including facilitated mediation, additional training and education, referrals to counseling and wellness support, or other remedial actions. They would be able to, the individual against whom the complaint is brought is afforded a right to be heard at the hearing, notice of investigation and hearings, and the result of any investigation. The complainant shall have the right to be heard in any investigation or hearing under this section that addresses alleged sexual misconduct by the individual against whom the complaint is brought. Evidence of the sexual history of the complainant of the alleged sexual misconduct shall not be considered by the commission in its issuance of any warning, reprimand, or recommended action. Process. It's a lot.
Representative Hanko, go ahead.
You kind of lost me at 9, whereas I was under the impression that this, sorry, I can't articulate where you lost me. So I'll ask another question. Is it complaints? When a complaint is being made, whether it be a candidate or a person sitting in the office that they were elected or appointed to be in, how do you resolve something like if the complaint is that their spouse or domestic partner works for instance, a nonprofit entity that the state provides direct financial support to? Like, we vote on a budget, and within that budget is that agency or nonprofit that the representative, for instance, or senator, spouse or domestic partner works for. How do you remediate that?
So I might ask Executive Director Sievert to talk about that. So right now, if you receive such a complaint about a member of the General Assembly, for instance, I imagine you would refer that to the House or Senate ethics panels.
Yeah, I think there's like a two-part analysis there. One is that we wouldn't handle that complaint to begin with because it would go back to the General Assembly to handle themselves. Number two, what you described doesn't necessarily sound like a conflict of interest. I'm just hearing about it. So just the fact that you allocate funding to an organization where somebody works, that I think even under state code of ethics wouldn't necessarily be a conflict of interest. You'd have to dig deeper and see, like, are there bonuses? Are there, what else is going on that might directly affect that single person? Is it going to allocate a bonus to somebody who is the spouse, or plus a $10,000 bonus to the president of the organization, and you happen to be married to that person, and then you're voting on it. So that would be where you're looking at like more of an actual conflict of interest versus say potentially an appearance of conflict of interest, but what you described wouldn't necessarily rise to either one of those. And so we usually handle those types of situations through advice and guidance or advisory opinions.
So how is this bill changing how that course of action?
Well, so somebody filed a complaint with us, so the answer would be, once it was investigated, you would probably find that it wasn't an actual conflict of interest, so it'd be closed out in that sense.
So if someone who resides in the same household works for a nonprofit that's receiving the majority of their funding from the state, and that person is in the General Assembly voting on those budgets, that's not a conflict of interest, but everybody else needs to say what's in their personal bank holdings, personal stock holdings. How is that relevant to a conflict of interest
So you're
when the
talking,
other situation is not?
sure, so we're talking about a conflict of interest, if you're voting on a budget that, a general budget, so you're really looking at, is this a general budget that says everybody who works for this organization is gonna get a 20% raise, then maybe you're looking at something that's an actual conflict of interest. But again, that's gonna go back to the General Assembly to make those kinds of decisions. But if we're talking about it generally, you're looking at who are the pool of people who are affected? Is it something like, I'm voting on something that is only going to benefit my spouse in some kind of significant way? It's not like, free parking or something, right? So we're kind of looking at like, what is at stake? Who's involved? Is it, are 100 people gonna benefit from this budget overall? Is it even like necessarily a given that because this organization is getting money, it's gonna benefit, the people who work there more than they're already, is it gonna raise their salary? Is it going to do what, right? So you have to really look through the specific facts of the situation to come up with whether there's conflict of interest or not. When it comes to disclosure, that is helping people identify what financial interests are so that they can identify what a conflict of interest is.
Well, I can honestly say if my spouse or domestic partner had holdings in something, it would not be a conflict of interest for me, but I'm not seeing the correlation here. Maybe as I learn more about this, I will, but I'm feeling like it's pretty irrelevant that disclosure information is included in here when we have people who are in the General Assembly that, for instance, are employed by the state of Vermont or whose spouses are employed at other places that receive a significant portion of their funding from the General Assembly, from taxpayer dollars. So I'm feeling like this is a little bit duplicitous, but
So, Executive Director Sibert, I want to give you a chance to respond and then I'll go to you, Representative Sessions.
As I say, like within the conflict of interest definition, it's like an interest that is no greater than another person in a similar situation. So there's already that caveat that you're not looking at kind of general situations where my spouse is employed by the state and you're voting on the budget. So it's already written into the statute. You're really getting into something where there's like a more direct financial interest.
Yeah, so the kind of, you're making the distinction, Director Sibert, from between what happens all the time in the citizen legislature where we're voting on things that, a teacher votes on an education bill and it affects the entire education system. That's not a conflict of interest. They have the same interests as other people in a group. As opposed to a complaint against, say, I don't know, a deputy or a commissioner that's directly involved in a contract that is a sole source out to their spouse's company or something like that. So if there was a complaint about that, you might not know what the motivations of somebody were unless their financial interests were disclosed kind of throughout universally in state government.
Maybe I give a poor example before the free parking. So for example, if you're voting on something that's going to give free parking to your spouse, then yes, you can say that's conflict of interest. If you're giving free parking to everyone who works at the agency of transportation and your spouse happens to work there, then that's when it's not going to be a conflict of interest under the state code of ethics.
so how is that person's holdings in a concrete company relevant to this discussion?
So if you own stock in a concrete company and then you're voting on giving a sole source contract to that concrete company, the idea is that the public has the right to know that you have a financial interest in that concrete company before you vote on it or as you vote on it or afterwards. So the idea is that like that's giving them the tools to identify the interest. Because right now you just have to say I own stocks, not I own 20% of the stocks in this specific concrete company.
So percentages, I get that if you're like a majority stockholder that you actually are part of running the business, but going back to the concrete example, how is that relevant if you are not voting on contracts that would directly benefit? Like, we in the General Assembly don't vote on company holdings on contracts. How is that relevant to us when we do not choose contractors? We don't choose organizations to carry out contracts. We're just making the policy. We're not doing the actual decision-making of choosing who is carrying out those policies. That's what I'm really trying to get at here.
Right, and so not every question on the form is going to like directly to everyone. So for example, I fill out the form, right, and so if I say $1,000 with Tesla, I'm never going to make any decisions that affect Tesla. But the idea is that everyone is providing the same information, that you can't have an individualized form for everyone, right? So you have one form that covers everyone. And so right now, so say, whether you're voting on a sole source contract may not come up in terms of like your spouse's financial interest, but it could come up in a different situation. So you could not be voting on a contract, but you could sit on a committee that helps make decisions about who gets contracts with the legislature for operations and management, right? And so then people would want to know that your spouse has an interest in the company that might be bidding on that contract.
Except most of us don't sit on those types of committees. So thank you.
What I think might be useful, I'll go to both of you, is for us to maybe have a more general conversation about disclosure and the sort of need for it. So maybe Director Sybrant, if we could pencil in some time with you to just talk more broadly about how disclosure works and all of that. Representative Waters Evans, and then I'll go to you, Representative Cheney.
Thank you. I mean, I was just going to say, which might be helpful to add on to the disclosure conversation, to have a conversation just about the topic of conflict of interest, because it is a small state made up of small towns, and we are all people who have other connections within our hometowns and our families and our spouses. And it's there's no way to avoid an intersection of it. It's of jobs and spouses and contracts and the work that we do here. I think it's just the conflict of interest lies in something that's specifically going to benefit one person. But like anyway, that's just what I was going to mention, is that conflict of interest, it's not like it's difficult to clearly define, but I think that it's something that we could do our best to clearly define in this situation. Does that make sense? It's going to be hard because even if you're talking about on a municipal level, you could have 6 brothers that live down the street and they all do different snowplow and contracting and all of these things. So there's always going to be that push and pull between those two things. Does that help or make sense?
You're directing that at me. I get those relationships.
Right,
I just do not get like what a holding in a multinational corporation has to do, especially if it's not my holding.
Yeah.
And that.
Oh, yeah, that's a separate issue, the disclosure and the conflict of interest.
Okay, yeah.
This is like back,
I get where you're going
Yeah.
with this. I just don't get the piece about having to disclose all of your personal financial information.
Yeah, well, it's not all of it, but it's
a lot of it. It's your tax return, according to something that we skipped over. There's a portion here.
that's all I wanted to say about conflict of interest, the similarly sticky kind of malleable definition that we can do our best to
I've sat
manage.
on enough boards
Yeah.
that I understand conflict of interest.
Okay. Yeah, it wasn't just for you, it was for everyone's same.
Representative Chase. You're good. We are going.
Yeah.
We are going to have a lot of time to dig into why in the world would we want to change what we're doing right now.
Could I suggest a retreat?
Did you have your hand up, Representative?
No.
Okay, sorry. Sometimes if I catch motion out of the corner of my eye, I just want to make sure I'm not skipping anybody as we go and move on. All right, I think we have a number of questions about the disclosure and conflict of interest that I think we'll do a little bit more diving into trying to come to some common ground on principles as we sort through these recommendations. So.
Chair McCarthy, would you like me to restate the section 10 details about expanding the commission's proposed powers to investigate, hold hearings, and make recommendations?
Yeah, I think that would be really useful. I think this, to me, actually, even more than the disclosure, is really the biggest substantive change about this bill. The disclosure, I think, have an impact to any of us who are serving public office if we choose to adopt those recommendations. But I think that this expanded power and scope of the work of the Ethics Commission is really one of the biggest policy decisions that we have before us in this bill. So yeah, Tim, if you could add that.
Sure. Section 10 adds a new section, 3 VSA, section 1223A. And in brief, this will enable the state ethics commissions to investigate complaints regardless of receiving a complaint or not, hold hearings to gather evidence and testimony, issue subpoenas and administer oaths, issue warnings or reprimands and recommendations and recommend actions to be taken, including facilitated mediation, additional training and education, referrals to counseling and wellness support, or other remedial actions. The individual against whom the complaint is brought is afforded a right to be heard at the hearing. They will also be notified of the investigation and hearings, and also will be notified of the result of any investigation. The complainant shall have the right to be heard, and any investigation or hearing under the section that addresses alleged sexual misconduct by the individual against whom the complaint was brought, evidence of the sexual history of the complainant of the alleged sexual misconduct shall not be considered by the commission in its issuance of a warning, reprimand, or recommended action. So just to recap there, investigatory powers will be new, power to hold hearings will be new, and both the investigation and hearings in particular, will have some elements of due process afforded to the person against who the complaint is made. And then also will provide certain a venue for the complaint to be heard as well.
As we look at this, I am hoping that we can take a look for comparison's sake, the next time we pick up a conversation about this section, how for instance, in the General Assembly, we have panels that receive these complaints and how they have procedures around keeping some confidentiality as they explore this. So I was going to ask you, Executive Director Sibrit, sort of how you would envision if we adopt this investigatory power, the sort of process of a complaint, and then if you did open up an investigation, would those hearings be public? Would they be closed? How would that?
And I think it's something that's probably best maybe we could write a thing out and send that around. I think there's a lot of different options how we can do that, and I'd say that because, it's a little bit new to us, this is gonna be added this year, so we haven't dove very deeply into, how the process would actually work, but certainly there are a myriad of ways that we can maintain confidentiality and still balance that with the public's right to know, so.
I think the guiding principle for me here is that we're providing accountability and transparency, but that we're also not, I wouldn't want the Ethics Commission to ever just become a venue for people to kick up spurious complaints. And so I want to make sure as we're empowering the State Ethics Commission, we're also making sure that there's a filter on which complaints go to a certain degree of investigation so that we're not, just creating a venue for people to attack public officials. Representative Higley.
Just looking at number 7, when it talks about the complainant shall have the right to be heard. I don't see anywhere where it talks about, an actual appeal process. Is that anticipated to be in here at some point, or is it just they can be heard during the investigation results and complaint information?
Good question. There is no appeals process in this structure as the bill is currently written. When could the complaint be heard? Sorry, I'm just trying to find the exact subsection. This is in COIL line. I believe memory serves. I'll double check, but I think I'll have to double check. So, the complaint shall have a right to be heard in an investigation resulting from the complaint brought. So as written, would afford the complainant the right to look something like an interview, but it doesn't necessarily extend to a hearing.
Representative Hooper, do you have a question?
Yeah, the complainant shall have a right to be heard. Is the complaint and the complainant part of the public record?
Let's see. I don't know if there's, well, I will have to double check to understand the confidentiality provisions to the extent that exists in this bill.
Yeah, so I think to the earlier exchange that I was bringing up, I think as we work on this section, we'll really want to delve into at what point the investigation and the hearings are public versus what powers they have to not be public. I think once we start to give investigatory powers, having the experience of ethics panel, especially when we think about like the sexual harassment and prevention panels that are here at the General Assembly, we have the ability to have a lot of that be confidential, a lot of the testimony that's taken in order to suss out the veracity and what can be done behind closed doors. And so I think we're going to have to think through, do we want to give certain powers to the Ethics Commission to allow those investigations to happen? So it could be that certain kinds of complaints get treated differently than others. And I think that we have some examples to draw from, but it's not my first read, Tim. I don't think it's totally fleshed out in this bill, to Representative Hooper's point.
Well, it was your point that raised my point, because to some degree, this is the ultimate political weapon. And I don't know that I share the degree to which you hope that it doesn't do anything like that, because politics is not getting any cleaner.
And
Yeah, I'm wondering if, Tim, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, under existing law, the state ethics code does have some confidentiality provisions, but the one I'm looking at seems to be most on point. Complaints and related documents in the custody of the commission shall be exempt from public inspection and copying under the Public Records Act and kept confidential.
Yeah, so we want to look at how that existing exemption from the public records would apply to the investigatory period and the investigatory docs. See if the current existing exemption covers it appropriately or not.
I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but I'd say like if we are finding no probable cause, I think that would be, the stage at which we would say, things remain confidential up to that point. We get to the point where you're making findings and recommendations. That's when you get to a point where there's confidentiality would not outweigh the public space. I will say that we are getting an increasing number of complaints at the Ethics Commission, but the nature of those complaints haven't been changing. And I wouldn't say that we see people attempting to use the process as well as of yet.
Percentage of counties you get considered referrals.
Zero.
TJ, did you have a?
I was going to chime in. Thank you. The vast majority of states that have an enforcement mechanism all have confidentiality up until there is some type of formal finding, after which usually the file or a substantial portion of the file becomes a matter of public record. All of your, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, all have similar provisions in that regard, that there needs to be a formal finding of probable cause.
Thank you. Representative Hank.
So that's not written into here at all. At the moment.
Not yet, but what Tim just referenced was the existing exemptions. And so I think what we'll want to delve into a little bit is whether those existing exemptions need to be expanded or be more specific to apply up to an appropriate point. And I'm sure we'll hear from folks, when I think about the analog to the testimony we're likely to hear tomorrow from the Vermont Press Association, for instance, about, what level of closed versus executive session is appropriate power to grant, one particular commission. Similarly with the Ethics Commission, if we want them to be effective, but also, value the public's right to know, we have to be really clear about how we're balancing the various interests and serving the county well. So sometimes deciding exactly where the line is in every situation is really tricky. That's what we're finding. And also apply to the conversations we had about the special committee on impeachment inquiry, and our ability to do investigations as a legislative committee was also really difficult set of public conversation about what's appropriate in terms of confidentiality. So we'll definitely want to have that conversation and get other stakeholders to weigh in. So it sounds like we'll have some work to do on this section if we decide to really move it forward. So I think we'll put a pin in section 10 and say it's got some questions that we'll need to answer. Moving on to
Part 5, which is just one section, section 11 pertains to state ethics commission membership. Section 11 will amend pre-VSA 1221, State Ethics Commission, a second time to expand membership from 5 to 6 members to include an additional one member appointed by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Let's pause there.
Executive Director Syvret, this is a recommendation that is really advancing, because if we have the municipal code, it would be good to have.
Yeah, I would say it was almost contingent on that. So that was in recognition that, right now we don't have anybody who is representing municipal interests on the commission. And so that it's only fair if we're expanding our jurisdiction to cover municipalities that we represent municipal interests.
Any questions on that?
Okay. Part 6 pertains to State Ethics Commission staffing. This is sections 12 and 13 of the bill, which together will convert the commission's positions of executive director and administrative assistant from part-time to full-time, and adds a full-time attorney as well. Section 12 removes the requirement that the executive director be part-time, which is in statute, and section 13 reclassifies those positions and appropriates funds for each. That'd be $150,000 for legal counsel, $150,000 for executive director, and $57,000 for administrative assistant. I'll pause that.
Executive Director Syvret, do you want to help the committee understand what the duties of each of the positions would look like, just in summary?
Sure. And so right now, I've gone over the services that Ethics Commission provides, and so you get a sense of what I do, which is advice, guidance, and during legislative session. A lot of research and advocacy around getting this legislation passed. So the vision would be for the legal counsel. We had initially envisioned it as somebody who could really have their core area of expertise be municipalities, municipal ethics. Because we would anticipate that really increasing our workload in terms of demands for existing services. And so that person we would have do trainings, kind of specialize in answering municipal inquiries, handling municipal complaints. So that was the vision for that particular position. Now that we also have this, these potential investigations and hearings, we're gonna have to rework how we envision all of the positions, what people look it, but probably that'd be joint responsibility between myself and staff council. Depending on what the demand is, I think there's also provision to or hiring outside counsel in specific cases. But yeah, so the 3-person staff of the ethics commission was drawn up the authority over municipal ethics to the extent that we're expanding existing services.
Any questions on the staffing piece? If we expand scope, there would need to be more staff. Representative Hango?
Is there a cost for listed anywhere here? I see the 150,000, that looks like it's for legal counsel. Is there anything about the expansion of part-time to full-time?
I think that's little E, line 17 to 19 on page 21.
Okay. So it's 150 and 150
Yeah, so
and
there's,
57. So it's 357,000.
yeah, so it's going from one half-time director to a full-time director, staff attorney, and an administrative staff person.
Okay, let's see. Part 7 of this bill pertains to ethics data collection. This is section 14. And let's see, section 14 renames section 1226 to ethics data collection commission reports. It requires those entities to which the commission refers complaints to report back annually, quote, with aggregate data on ethics complaints not submitted to the commission and with complaints separated by topic and the disposition of those complaints, including any prosecution, enforcement action, or dismissal. And those reporting entities that are the Office of the Attorney General and State's Attorney's offices, the Department of Human Resources, House and Senate ethics panels, the Judicial Conduct Board, the Professional Responsibility Board, and the Office of State Court Administrator.
And Tim, so that's aggregate data. So it's the idea that it would say there were X number of complaints that came to the House Ethics Panel and X number that came to DHR and how they were disposed of.
Exactly. Yep. Part 8 is the last section, 15, which is just the effective dates. This act shall take effect on passage, except that section 1, which again has to do with candidate financial disclosure requirements. That will go into effect on January 1st, 2026.
So if we passed this bill, the elected officials would have to start doing the increased financial disclosure, but the candidate disclosure requirements wouldn't go into effect until the next cycle. Representative Marwicky.
Is the rationale for a date that far out that it would take that long to set this?
I can't speak to the rationale as to why, but that's a sensible policy reason to do so. But that would either endorse or not.
Yeah, Executive Director Siver, I think the idea here is actually just that the candidate pieces don't come into the 2024 cycle, just so that we're not making anything, doing election law in an election year.
I wasn't involved in that discussion, but I believe that is the rationale. Also, the Ethics Commission, with the plug-in and explanation, we just set up a new online filing system that we hope to make, or we are making available to anyone else who wants to use it now. The legislature. So that is something that we're working out the bugs on now. We went through very smoothly this year, but just in terms of building out the systems that are going to accommodate this increased disclosure.
So who are the current users of that system versus the way we file here in the legislature?
The system that we just set up, that is for executive officers, ethics commission members, and sheriffs. But now that it's built, we're happy to share it with anyone who wants to use it.
So we've completed our walkthrough of each of these. Any questions for legislative counsel or our guests on words on the page? So I'll go Representative Hango.
Yeah, thank you. Back in section 1, I just would like 100% clarity whether we're talking about investment holdings or investment income, which indicates that you have bought and sold something and you've made a profit on it.
Let's see, so this is at the page, top of page 3 in subsection, let's see, A1B, investments, generally described as investment income. So that's just the short handle for investments, including, and as we, typical statutory interpretation, including, individual stock holding investments.
It's just.
I'm not,
vague.
sorry.
Yeah, it's vague because investments are one thing, you're holding them and it says holdings, but then investment income is not realized until you actually sell that investment.
Maybe TJ or Executive Director Severett, could you comment on what the recommendation is? And then we'll try to clean up the language in future drafts if we take that part up to make sure we're capturing the recommendation.
The recommendation is to disclose individual stocks, if they're holdings, and not just, if they're providing you with income. And so the rationale is, of course, to understand people's individual, financial interests. And, you know, I do recognize, you know, we see Tesla, for example, you're never gonna have any effect or what Tesla does. But, you know, ownership structures in companies are, you know, can be very different. So you can have a very small company and somebody owns stock in that company and I think you own by stockholders. So it captures those situations.
And I am happy to speak with our tax attorney for maybe some advice on clarifying this.
Okay, because it sounds like
They
the
look like-
intent is to list your holdings, which doesn't mean you've made any income off from them at all. But with this language in here that says investment income, that leads you to believe that there is income being made off from those holdings.
Yeah, I think in existing statute, it said investments described generally as investment income. And then we added the language that follows. And so I think by including individual stock holdings in a previous definition that was described as investment income, it became a little confusing. Representative
A
Figley.
couple of questions on that point there. You know, a lot of people change their stock portfolio quite often. I mean, not me, some people actually. But my point would be, when are they required to make those changes? Is it on an annual basis or is it whenever they make a change?
Annual basis covering the last 12 months.
And then the other question I've got is there any, what would it be called, a statute of limitations on somebody filing an ethics complaint?
We don't currently have that, but we would, yeah, would be open to the idea that we can put in statute. We have had, this is how we interpret it. We have had people who've asked to file complaints about things that happened 5 years ago. And, you know, and with a person that no longer, you know, works for the state. And so in those cases, we say, you know, this is not, you know, a complaint that is right. It also, you know, it comes before the ethics accepted. So like on, you know, regular, you know, in our office, we're making this kind of interpretation. So we're saying it has to follow the code of ethics since the code of ethics was adopted. It has to be somebody that's currently, you know, in a state position, and behavior generally has to be, not necessarily ongoing, but it has to be, you know, we're not looking 10 years back or something. Well, we couldn't be state code of ethics, so it's an effect then. But we are open to having that in statute for sure, and especially when we get to the point where we're investigating complaints and holding hearings and making findings. Like it would make sense to have statute of limitations there.
Representative Cooper.
I think Representative Hango's discussion is a morass of ambiguity to some degree, because it says investment income, and we automatically start to think about stocks and bonds. Talking about investment income from the $3 million that the representative might have at the bank, and even though you don't get it, you still declare that your annual income tax. So there's a difference between those two things. Somebody that's also running an individually managed IRA or retirement account, they don't get any money until they cash it in, and then it's taxable. So that whole section is pretty vague. But my question was, how many people, I see the positions that we're adding here, but how many investigators or whatever, does the commission intend to?
I think right now, the way it's written, the intent would be to have staff counsel do the investigation, and then there's a set aside for a certain amount of money to hire outside counsel to handle the investigations. That's what it is now. In terms of like what the actual workload is gonna look like, we don't know yet. So at this point in time, we're not envisioning, the need to add investigator now, but potentially in the future, that would be something.
Senator Waters.
Thank you. And I just wanted to clarify, it's not, am I correct in saying it's not like these are all being filed and then someone's going through and pouring over all of them and finding out if your grandfather owns 10,000 or even like works for somewhere where you have $10,000 worth of stock or something. It's reported.
Yeah, so
Right, like the investigators aren't investigating the current, all of the filings that are, all of the things that people are filing. Right,
So that's a good question, I think, just about the kind of practice. So
yeah,
the principle that I think you were getting at, Executive Director Sibrit, in terms of the disclosure, is that we're identifying what potential conflicts may be out there, and the public can make of that what they will. It's only when there's a complaint that you would actually investigate whether there, was a conflict of interest in a decision that a policymaker or a public official made, right?
Right, I mean, well, there's two ways that that can happen. I mean, yes, we're only gonna do it based on a complaint, so you're looking at it when there's a complaint because somebody took an action that relates to somebody feels like there's conflict of interest, or if I talk about the actual form, if they intentionally leave something off. And it rises to a level of fraud, so that would be the other scenario. But the intent would have to be that you're trying to hide it, so. Feeling like you shouldn't have to might be, something that's up for debate if somebody does it, but we're really looking at the intent of like why you're not disclosing. And I can just confirm that, like right now, what we interpret investment income to include is if you sold the stock, but if you haven't sold the stock, then you don't have to disclose it. And if you have, and it excludes retirement income unless you're actually taking something from your retirement account. So if those are your concerns, then you can add in language there saying like, this excludes retirement, income. This is the requirement that you reveal individual stocks, excludes retirement income unless you're just taking, specific income from like an individual stock of some sort. I won't get into the details now. Just saying, there's a way, whatever your concerns are, there are ways that we can, qualify it while still getting at the core concern.
Yeah, so I think we have a couple layers of things that we would need to work through in order to make the session. I think there's a philosophical discussion that we need to have as a committee about what is the virtue of disclosure and at what dollar amount does it make sense where, and how much can we make this universal? So those are all kind of policy choices that we need to make. And I'm interested in having that conversation as we dive in. And then there's also just we need to clarify what is the recommendation here and have we gotten the language to really encapsulate that? And I think what we've beat to death now is that we need to better define the individual stock holding versus investment income to reflect what the committee decides is the right thing to disclose once we get there. So we'll try to get the words on the page to accurately reflect the outcome of that policy discussion. Other questions while we're on this? So that was a lot this afternoon to absorb. I really appreciate everybody being engaged and thinking through some of this. Thank you, Executive Director Sibrit. I know you did a ton of work in preparation for getting these recommendations before us. So invite everybody to, if you haven't read the report on the municipal piece and some of the feedback that the commission got over the summer and fall, do that. That's up on our page. And then we will be coming back to this likely next week. Okay. And thank you, TJ, for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right. So committee, we will be taking up H649 at 9 in the morning. We'll be hearing from the Vermont Press Association, and I think that is it for today, unless anybody has any agenda or things we need to flag. Not seeing any hands. All right. Thank you so much for the good work